So I wanted to do this term project analysis in this format, doing a presentation with the recording on top of it. The reason why is partially for selfish reasons. I am not very good at presenting and I have a lot of anxiety about it, so I always like to take any opportunity I can to kind of practice those skills and just get as comfortable with it as I can. Also, I do like showing data in a little bit more dynamic way, so I think this lends very well to that. So for my term project analysis, I'm going to be looking at disabled undergraduate students' unique library and information service needs. For my research paper, I focused on disabled undergraduate students in the library, and this is just a continuation of that. So I broke this into 4 sections. The first is the description section. The second is the methodology section. The third is my findings, and the fourth is a short discussion session. So we will go through each part of that. So for the description, we're going to quickly look at what this project is about and what the purpose is. So the description was to collect data on disabled undergraduate students' library experiences based on, and kind of base that on the research I did for my previous assignment. And the purpose was to use this collected data to create an information product that supports that group, so disabled undergraduate students. So having that in mind, I kind of created the survey using this methodology. So an important thing I did want to mention is a disclaimer. I very seriously take the ethical impacts of researching marginalized and vulnerable communities very seriously, and particularly during a pandemic. I was nervous about, is this class project going to, cause more harm than it's worth? I always think about, IRB, city group training. I always think about the concept of beneficence. Am I minimizing the risks to maximize the benefits? So I had to think about a way to minimize the risk because I know a lot of people are having a very tough time during the pandemic, and I was stressed as a student researcher to add on to that, and I didn't know how to ethically best do that. So there was a long process and lots of discussions with people. But I just wanted to say that was a very big thing in how I ended up putting the survey out into the world. So for my methodology, so I created the questions, and then actually one of my good friends is a UNC public health researcher, and so I had her look over the survey to kind of give me feedback. I, edited, and then I finalized from there. Something I did was I did not collect any identifiable information, and this was completely voluntary. For the purpose of this project, that felt okay. I'm sure that in bigger research projects, there would need to be some way to identify and keep track of responses. I didn't feel the need to do that in this short survey, so I just made it as anonymous as possible, not collecting emails, not collecting names. I didn't collect anything like that. It also was completely voluntary. There were no questions that were required, so people could fill in as little or as much as they wanted. And then I sent out the survey to volunteers through email. So I either found the volunteers through word of mouth, so I asked people, like family and friends, people who were and are undergraduate students, if they'd be willing to participate. And then I also posted on my personal social media asking if anyone else would be interested in participating. And then, like I said, I sent out those surveys via email. So this survey had a combination of yes, no, multiple choice questions, as well as a question that there were several options you could select from. Short answer questions and Likert scale questions, and a lot of these questions had options for elaboration after if the survey responder wanted to include more. So let's look at the survey contents. So I started out with 3 questions. The first was, are you currently an undergraduate student or recent graduate? And then the second and third were very intentional, why I split those. I mentioned in my initial research assignment that, there is a huge, it's hard to kind of understand how many people are disabled and identify as having a disability, because testing, like diagnostic testing, is often very expensive. There are huge barriers in healthcare that prevent people from getting the help they need, the diagnosis they need. There are a lot of people who may self-identify as having a disability, and that is true. They just might not have gotten the official stamp for, a wide range of reasons. So I wanted to split those. I wanted to ask, do you self-identify as having a disability? And then the third question was, are you registered with the University Office of Accessibility, and or do you receive accommodations? So do you identify, and then are you recognized by the university as this, being a part of your student experience? So I intentionally wanted to separate those, and that ended up being a good idea. I then also asked, 4 questions about their library use. So I asked, have you utilized any library services during your time as a student? And then I asked, what library services or resources have you used? I listed 8 options, which we'll get to. And then people could select, none or as many as they wanted. And then the last 2 were short answers. So what library service was the most useful and why, and then what was the least useful and why. And so they had space to kind of fill out, as much or as little as they wanted in that way. So then I had 3 Likert scale questions. So the first was a general. If you answered yes to having a disability, rate your library's general accessibility, with 0 being not accessible and 5 being highly accessible. That was the same scale that was used across all 3 of these questions. So the second one focused on if your disability is physical, rate your library's general accessibility. And the third was if your disability is not physical, rate your library's general accessibility. And once again, those had the 0 being not accessible and 5 being highly accessible. So those were the 3 Likert scale questions. And then I had these last couple questions about, a little more in depth. So the first was, if you have answered yes to having a disability, have there been any barriers that have prevented or limited your access to library services? And then if you answered yes to receiving accommodations, how has that impacted your overall experience as a student in the library? I was very curious about this one. And then the last 2 kind of were there to help me guide my final product and kind of better understand, like, if there are any suggestions I could make. So what improvements would you like to see in library services? And then what information services or products would best assist you as a student moving forward? So findings, what did the responses reveal? So I had 7 responses, which I was honestly pretty shocked by and very thankful for. So the first is, are you currently an undergraduate student or a recent graduate? And the answer 100% was yes. And then this really, shows why I chose to split this question into 2 parts. So do you self-identify as having a disability? 71.4% of people who responded said yes. But when you look at are you registered with the University Office of Accessibility, and or do you receive accommodations? 71.4% said no. So an overwhelming majority of people are not registered. It could be for a variety of reasons, like I said, the time it takes, expenses for getting tested, like getting all the health care and assistance they need. So a huge majority are not registered, but identify as having a disability. And then the people who were registered, 28.6%, do not receive accommodations. So no one was registered and received accommodations. So have you utilized any library services during your time as a student? So 100% of people said yes, which is good. That's what we like to see. And then this is a question I had mentioned that I broke into 8 parts, and people could select as many as they wanted or as few as they wanted. What library services have you utilized? So we have online resources, reference services, collections, subject specialty services, physical spaces, events, the DMC, the Digital Media Commons, and technology. That includes it included printing, the computer labs, tech checkout, things like that. So 100% of the people reported using online resources, the collections, which is both digital and physical, as well as physical spaces. And then 85.7% said yes to reference services and tech. And then 28.6% said subject specialty services, which is like your subject librarian or any sort of additional higher level help. And then events were at 42.9%. 0% said the DMC. I was a little confused by that because I know a lot of people do utilize it, but I also recognize that it varies so much by subject area. So maybe the participants that I had sent it out to had never used it for their particular area of study. And then I also realized that there were multiple people from different universities that responded about their experiences as an undergraduate student just in general, not specific to UNCG. So I was thinking maybe they just don't know what it is. So there were 0 responses for that, but I still thought it was important to include. So for the short answer ones, I just kind of compiled them and then pulled out some phrases that kept popping up or that I thought were significant. So definitely online resources was big. Anything related to reference, getting help through chat, reference services again, having a library staff person who could help answer questions. Events were helpful for this person. They, are relieving stress, providing support, particularly during times of high stress. Online resources again. Physical spaces were useful because they provided a safe, quiet, free place to work. And then someone highlighted research guides, citation guides, and reference services. So out of all of these, reference and online resources were two of the biggest ones that were noted. So as far as least useful goes, someone said physical spaces because they prefer to work from home or in a coffee shop. Another person said anything tech related, the computer labs are hot, crowded, and loud, and it's hard to find people in there that can help. Another individual said online resources were poorly designed, confusing, and sometimes not updated properly. Also, this highlights what I was saying about the Digital Media Commons. Someone said, I don't know what that is. And then 2 people actually said events because they either have a low turnout or as a non-traditionally aged undergrad student and someone who is online, events aren't helpful and accessible, which I hadn't really thought of. So I was glad for that response. So the next couple ones are the Likert scale questions. So the first one is if you answered yes to having a disability, rate your library's general accessibility. So of the people that responded, 3 people said a 4, and the scale again is 0 not accessible, 5 highly accessible, whereas 1 person said a 3 and 1 person said a 5. So that was an interesting spread. And then I on top of that Likert scale, there was an option for people to elaborate, and these were some of the elaborations that were given. So sometimes it's loud and overwhelming, but there are staff who I feel like I can depend on. Another individual said the library is highly accessible. Another response said it can be a little chaotic and hard to physically navigate when I can't walk as fast as others. And then another big one that came up was a more streamlined way to access our digital library collections and sift through them. So then the next question was, if you answered yes to having a disability and your disability is physical, rate your library's general accessibility. So this person, there was 1 response. Once again, 0 not accessible, 5 highly accessible. This person rated a 3, and then did not provide any elaboration on it. So we just have a 3. But then on the next question, if you've answered yes to having a disability and your disability is not physical, rate your library's general accessibility. So this was kind of split in a similar way to the first Likert scale question. So 2 people said a 4, which is almost highly accessible, whereas 1 said 3 and 1 said 5. And so as far as elaboration on this selection goes, some things that were pointed out were virtual resources, there being errors or issues, hard to get in contact with staff when they need assistance, and that the online resources could be more intuitive and disability friendly. So the question, if you answered yes to having a disability, have there been any barriers that have prevented or limited your access to library services? So 80% of the people who responded to this question said no. 20% said yes, and the response, the one response about elaboration that I got back said that sometimes other students are disruptive and impact my ability to focus. Sometimes virtual resources aren't fully accessible. And sometimes it's hard to get all of the help I need from using the chat. So as far as the question of what improvements would you like to see in the library, a big one was more educative resources for students who aren't as familiar with using our digital collections and databases. This person mentioned a tutorial, better quiet spaces, staff more well-versed in accessibility issues, spaces made more accessible for folks with physical disabilities, more comprehensive online resources, better physical space, another one about physical space, and more intuitive guidance on how to access library resources, and additionally, more accessible and inclusive formatting. And this person actually mentioned web accessibility guidelines, which was interesting. So what information services or products would best assist you as a student? Like I said, I kind of asked this question to help guide what I was going to create because I had in mind what I wanted to do, but sometimes you have in mind what you want to do and it's not really what the community needs. So I wanted to kind of pose this. And 2 that were that really stuck out to me is a quick guide to the library, and as well as more online resources. Someone else mentioned a larger, more comprehensive digital library collection, increased access to certain databases and e-journals. So, these 2 parts of quick guide to the library and online resources were really helpful for me. So there were some immediate constraints that popped out that I wanted to note. So the first was awareness. We have a vast number of online resources. I think people might struggle to find them sometimes. Someone else mentioned a tutorial on research. The UNCG Jackson Library has an entire tutorial section, which I do think is kind of hard to find, but we have tutorials on forming keywords, researching, using databases, a lot of times on study guides or research guides. Subject librarians will have created tutorials on navigating certain databases. So I do think that the awareness was a big thing there. Another constraint was status as a student and student worker. I had to kind of think through what I could realistically do, especially in such a short time frame. And then another constraint was budget and policies. So some people mentioned growing our physical or our digital collections and subscribing to more journals, and I know for a fact that just will not happen. I've kind of been included in some of the discussions that UNCG has had about, not subscribing to any new journals due to budget restraints, or any new databases. So I just know that would not happen. Even if I had power, that would not be a thing. As well as some policies that I thought could kind of challenge some of what was mentioned. People asked for better physical spaces and more physical spaces, but I do know Jackson Library has very seriously taken or adopted the policy of social distancing. So they've removed a lot of physical spaces and tried to take away more group study spaces to just promote safety during the time of COVID. And that probably changes how people are able to use the library. So that's something I would definitely want to discuss with my superiors, my supervisors, about how we could best address some of those concerns, but I'm not sure the best way to do that because it's just policy to keep people safer from COVID. So those were just some immediate constraints. So I wanted to do a short discussion. Where do I go from here? So some common themes that popped out, like I was just talking about, physical spaces, as well as online resources. That was big. Getting help. So some people mentioned it was hard to get in contact with staff, or they didn't know where to go. So navigating all of it, navigating databases, navigating physical spaces, just kind of the whole environment, as well as events were both coming up as good and bad things. So I started kind of thinking through what type of product I was going to create. So I kind of thought through what are the common threads, what are the big themes that are popping out, and I kind of came up with that list that I just talked about. And then I started thinking about, okay, well, what can I actually do? What am I able to do right now that I can create and share as a student in a shorter time frame? So then drafting, I had to think through, okay, I have this idea of making this quick guide. What is the best way I can showcase that? So I came up with the idea of a brochure that could be displayed around the library with kind of a lot of quick accessibility tips and accessing, library resources. So I came up with the brochure idea, and then how do I make this accessible and useful? So I had to just think through what sections I was going to include, and, got feedback from peers to, create a product that would be accessible and useful. So my final thoughts behind all of this, what worked. So responses were often in-depth and useful. I got a lot out of them. And designing the product was definitely easy after feedback. I got a good sense of what people would want. And then the responses I got from my initial draft were so helpful. And I was able to, I think, create a product that a lot of people would find useful. What didn't work, some questions needed to be clearer. I kind of expected that on my end. I am not a practiced researcher, so there were some questions that I would absolutely go back and change to make the survey itself clearer. I, would clarify what the DMC is. I would, change this and that. I also would have liked more responses. I'm still very thankful I did get 7, but I do think I would have liked to hear from more people. And then what didn't work, time constraints. It just was hard to, get as much as I could out of just a semester-long project. And I know that if this was a year or 2, as often a lot of research is, type of survey, I could have changed things and gotten better responses. So that was a little challenging, but it was still a good exercise, and I'm very thankful I did it. So this is warped. This is not what it actually looks like, but I tried to fit it into the actual screen. So this is the outer shell of the product. I'll also upload this obviously as the other part of the assignment, but I wanted to have it here as well. So I have a section on Contact Us, as well as a section on accessibility. So those are a couple different resources and like tech items that UNCG offers that people can use. And then the inner shell, so the physical spaces section has about the other wheelchair ramp, because I've gotten questions about that, as well as what questions are group floors and what questions are quiet floors. So the online resources, I just tried to quickly highlight where you can find the research and resource guides, as well as the citation guides, and then this little box cuts it off, but I have a section at the bottom about the tutorials, so people can access those about, researching in various stages or different parts of it. And then getting help, I wanted to include that people at the checkout desk can get any materials for you. And then the reference desk is providing help virtually, so I wanted to include what the chat box looks like and where you can find it. So all in all, this was a great experience, and I think I got a lot of great information. I'm looking forward to hearing your feedback, particularly about my information product, and that is pretty much it.